Well, hi there. Welcome to the UW-Madison Information School's Continuing Education course, Introduction to Digitization Projects. This is the week one lecture for that course. So each week we'll have a lecture kind of like this one, a few readings, a discussion question, and an assignment. You should expect to spend about 2 to 3 hours per week on this course. And of course, lots of other information is available in the syllabus in the Canvas page for this class. So this week we're just going to do a quick intro to some basic concepts, and more details will be coming in future weeks. This week we're going to talk about what a digitization project is and isn't, why digitization is an important tool for preservation and access, some things to consider about digitization projects, a very quick overview of the process, and then a little bit about this week's assignment, which will lead into the project plan you'll be completing for the whole semester. So let's get started. First off, as you've seen on the syllabus and when you registered for the class, I'm your instructor. My name is Kristen Whitson, and I'm a very proud graduate of this very program at the iSchool. I work in Wisconsin for an organization called WILS, Wisconsin Library Services, where I'm basically a library and archives related project manager for several different projects around Wisconsin. Consortia of libraries and other organizations hire WILS to project manage for them, and each of us who works there is assigned to different projects based on our experience and expertise. So I'm assigned about half of my time to a project called Recollection Wisconsin, which is a central access point for about 450 digital collections from around the state of Wisconsin. The rest of the time I work on other various digital stewardship projects, cultural heritage projects with Wisconsin's Native Nations, some archives consulting, grant projects that have to do with digitization, and so on. This is my second time teaching this course for the iSchool, so I'm super glad to be here and excited to virtually meet all of you. Okay, so what is a digitization project, this thing that we're about to be talking about for 8 weeks here? At its core, a digitization project involves converting physical, analog materials into digital formats. So this process is central to preserving and providing access to items that exist in a non-digital state, whether those are historical documents, photographs, artwork, or audiovisual materials like cassette tapes or film reels. So when we talk about digitization, what we're referring to is the conversion of 2D items, such as photographs, letters, manuscripts, maps, into digital images that can be viewed on a computer screen. Now, that said, digitization is not just limited to flat two-dimensional objects. It can also encompass 3D objects where techniques like advanced photography or object scanning can allow us to create detailed digital representations of items like sculptures, artifacts, or any physical object with depth. In addition to 2D and 3D materials, digitization can also include audiovisual materials. So that might involve converting old VHS tapes, cassette recordings, or reel-to-reel films into digital video or audio files. So by doing this, we not only preserve the content, but we also make it more accessible and easier to share with others. It's important that when we talk about digitization, we know that we're not referring to born digital materials, those items that were created in a digital format from the outset, like a digital photograph taken with a smartphone or an email. Those are very important projects and workflows with born digital materials, but just not the focus of what we're doing in this class. Instead, the digitization projects that we're going to work on focus on materials that began their existence in a physical or analog form and require a deliberate process to bring them into the digital realm. That's what we're going to be doing. These projects can vary in scope and scale, from a simple project to digitize a family photo album to a large-scale initiative to preserve and share the cultural heritage of a community. But regardless of the scale, the ultimate goal of the digitization projects we're working on is to create a digital surrogate of the original material that can be preserved, accessed, and shared more easily than the physical counterpart. Okay, So all of that information about digitization projects, let's talk about some examples of what those might look like in real life. And I also encourage you to spend some time looking up various examples of these types of digital collections, either in your own organizations, your own town, or just searching the internet. So, for example, let's say a public library in Wisconsin, let's say, since that's where the UW-Madison High School is based, a small town Wisconsin public library might undertake a project to digitize a collection of local newspapers, which date back to the 19th century. The goal is to preserve these fragile papers and make them available online for researchers and community members who are interested in local history. That's one kind of project a public library might undertake. Let's say somebody just has a family photo collection of their own family photos, and the family decides to digitize their collection of old family photos, some of which might be over 100 years old. They might use a high resolution scanner to create digital copies of the photographs and organize them into an online album. A university archives might use some manuscripts from their manuscript collection. They might embark on a project to digitize a collection of medieval manuscripts, let's say. These rare and delicate documents would be carefully scanned and the digital images made available through the library's digital collections portal. In a museum might undertake a project to create a 3D digital model of a collection of ancient pottery. Using 3D scanning technology, the museum could create detailed digital replicas of that pottery, which would then be made available in an online exhibit. Audiovisual preservation. So, a nonprofit organization, let's say focused on something like civil rights history, could decide to digitize their collection of oral history interviews, which had originally been recorded on cassette tapes. The tapes would be converted to digital audio files and supplemented with transcripts. That would be one way to do an AV digitization project. Finally, a government records digitization project might center on a city government that decides to digitize decades of city council meeting minutes and public records to improve accessibility and transparency. The records could be scanned and the resulting digital files indexed for easy searching. So these are just a few examples that demonstrate the very wide range of materials that can be digitized and the diverse goals of digitization projects. There's lots of room for imagining what's possible here. Digitization can play a really crucial role in preserving and providing access to archival materials. So I want to talk about three key reasons why digitization can be really important: preservation, accessibility, and cultural heritage. So first and foremost, digitization can be, emphasize can be, a powerful tool for preservation. We're going to talk more about that in a second. Many of the physical materials that we value, like old photographs, documents, tapes, or artifacts, are inherently fragile. So over time, these items can deteriorate due to environmental factors like humidity, light exposure, and handling. So for example, paper can become brittle, photographs can fade, AV materials like tapes can degrade. So digitizing these materials creates a digital copy that can be stored and preserved. So even if the original item is lost, damaged, or destroyed, the digital version could remain intact with lots of work in digital preservation, something else we're going to talk about in a second. This is especially important for rare or unique items that cannot be replaced. Creating a digital surrogate is not a replacement for physical preservation procedures, and digitization itself is not preservation, but utilizing a digital copy for research purposes can help prolong the life of a physical item. In access, beyond preservation, digitization significantly enhances accessibility in a couple of forms of the word accessibility. Physical materials, by their nature, are often difficult to access. They might be housed in a single location, only available during certain hours, or they might require special permission to view. And this limited access can be a barrier for researchers, students, and the general public who are interested in those materials. Digitization can break down those barriers because once the materials are digitized, they can be shared widely and accessed from anywhere in the world. The other aspect of accessibility that's really helpful in digitization projects is that if you have something with a lot of text on it, you can run it through a process called OCR, optical character recognition, and now those materials are searchable or readable with a screen reader. And we'll talk about that more in one of the later sections of the course. Finally, digital preservation can play a pretty vital role in preserving and sharing cultural heritage in a community, especially within local communities or underrepresented communities. Cultural heritage encompasses traditions, stories, and artifacts that define a community's identity, and these materials are often at risk of being forgotten as older generations pass away and physical items deteriorate. So, through digitization and digital stewardship projects, communities can preserve their cultural heritage in a way that is both permanent, which I use loosely in quotes, again, we'll talk about that more, and shareable. So, for instance, oral histories, traditional music, and historical artifacts can be made or can be digitized and be made available to future generations. So, this not only preserves the community's identity, but allows it to be shared with a broader audience. Digitization is a critical tool in our efforts to preserve fragile materials, make them accessible to a wider audience, and safeguard cultural heritage. So, by embracing that digitization, we really get to play a part in ensuring that valuable knowledge, the history, and the traditions contained in those materials are available for future researchers to study. I said several times, especially in the last slide, okay, we'll talk about that in a second. We'll talk about that in a second. Here's the time we're going to talk about those things. So here's a few considerations I want to mention here at the outset, and we're going to talk more about these in detail in future segments of the course. But I just want you to keep these few things in mind from the beginning. So just first of all, just because you can digitize and put something online doesn't necessarily mean that you should. And we're going to talk about the ethics of this a fair amount in week 3. So there are a lot of privacy and ethical considerations that we'll discuss, including thinking not just about past harmful content, but also culturally sensitive content, content that could include minors, and so on. This will be something you consider about your hypothetical project that you'll be designing in this course. Next, just because you can digitize something or put it, just because you can digitize something doesn't necessarily mean you need to put it online. Those are two different steps, the digitizing and the putting online, and they're treated differently by copyright protections. So it's perfectly valid to digitize a collection and only have it available for on-site use. That can get you out of some tricky copyright considerations, and again, we're going to talk about that in week 3 of the course. As I mentioned in the last slide, digitization alone is not preservation, and you should know that the phrase digital preservation, quote unquote, is a subdiscipline in this field that works to make digital items available and accessible for many years to come. But digital preservation can be just as much or more work than physical preservation. So just because you digitize something, it does not mean that that digital surrogate will be accessible or uncorrupted forever. So I just don't want you to fall into the trap of thinking that you can digitize physical items to save space and then discard the originals. That's not best practice, except in a few very select cases. So if you're coming to this thinking like, I'll scan all the old photos and then we can toss the photos, I do get those questions sometimes. We're going to talk about more why that's not a great idea. And then finally, the thing I want to impress upon you, I think maybe the most in this course, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, truly. There are really high level, technically superior ways to digitize archival materials. And there are times and places for that kind of intensity. Really high end scanners, really detailed workflows that handle a ton of quality assurance and making sure that every detail is exactly perfect. But what we're talking about in this course is introducing those of you who may never have done a digitization project or are just getting started to the possibilities of digitization and digital stewardship. And those possibilities don't require necessarily a lot of experience or fancy technology. It's always been my view that doing some digitization, maybe imperfectly, is better than doing no digitization because we're scared of doing it imperfectly. Getting the material online and accessible when appropriate with minimal metadata might be better than spending years in writing really extensive metadata before getting anything online. I work in my daily life with small libraries and historical societies all the time, and I find that folks are more often than not intimidated by the processes and overwhelming amount of information available on how to do this. So, my role there and here in this class is to empower them and you to just start and to enjoy what you are able to do in these projects. Okay. That reassurance aside, I'm going to give you a quick overview of the steps in the digitization process, and each of these steps will make up a topic for each of our weeks of the course going forward. So this week is week 1, it's an introduction, and then the next 7 weeks, each week will cover one of these areas. I also want to mention that these topics are iterative, so meaning that you might have to do one step a few times or go backwards or leap forwards. There's really no wrong way to do this process, but this is the workflow that I recommend. The digitization process includes these several key steps to ensure successful, ethical, and sustainable projects. So first of all, plan and prioritize by identifying the materials to digitize based on their value, condition, and accessibility needs. This planning step coming first is pretty important. You need to plan before you can do the rest of it. And a careful planning process, which we're going to spend a good amount of time on next week, will make the rest of the project proceed that much more successfully. Then, after you've done a bunch of planning about what your project's going to look like, obtain both copyright and ethical permissions to ensure you have the legal and cultural rights to digitize and share the materials. Next, you move on to the actual digitization process, where you digitize the materials through scanning or reformatting them, ensuring high-quality digital files. Once digitized, you describe those materials by creating accurate and detailed metadata, which helps users understand and find the materials. With the metadata in place, you can now share those digitized items through online platforms or repositories, making them accessible to your intended audience. It's also essential to focus on long-term sustainability. So after that, we talk about storage and maintenance for the digital files to ensure their preservation through regular backups and digital preservation strategies. And then finally, you evaluate the project to determine if it meets or is meeting its goals, whether in terms of preservation, accessibility, or community engagement, and assess areas for improvement. Each of these steps really is critical for a well-rounded, successful digitization initiative. Okay, so our first week's assignment is going to be choosing a collection to digitize. You're going to pick a collection, real or imagined, that you're going to use to complete your assignments for each week of the rest of the course. Like I say, it can be real or imagined, but if it's a collection that you really have access to or that you really would love to digitize at some point in the future or as we go, the material that you learn will have more practical applications if it is related to a real collection, but it can be hypothetical and made up too. That's okay. Your final product for this entire 8-week course will be an actionable project plan to digitize a collection. So let's say you decide that you want to digitize your family's photo collection. Let's just say we're starting with 100 photos, and that's what you decide you're going to do your project on. The first week, you're going to come up with a plan for those photos. The second week, you're going to figure out, do you have permission from your family members to digitize and share those photos? The third week, you're going to actually scan those photos. The fourth week, you'll describe them, and so on. So for this first week's assignment, what I'd like you to do is think a little bit about what that collection might be. Submit a short paragraph to me describing what you know of or have imagined about the collection. There's more details about this assignment in the Canvas module. And if you're having a hard time coming up with an idea for a collection, just email me or message me in Canvas and we will come up with an idea for you. And of course, email and get in touch with me in any way you need to if you have any questions. I'm really excited to be on this next 8-week journey with you, and I'm so glad you're here. Thanks so much.